Rebirth+Double Strong+True and false 1000 Gold+Family crematorium. In his previous life, he was calculated to lose his virginity because the crown prince had not entered the bridal chamber. On the second day, he was exposed by his own sister and was despised by the royal family. After enduring all the trials and tribulations, he was reborn and returned to his wedding night. He changed his usual non-competitive personality and hugged his 9,000-year-old thigh. Chapter 3. Traces on the Chest. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Yi Qingqing stood at the door and looked at the man sitting in the front seat. The crown prince, Xiao Qingze, is also her husband who has worshipped heaven and earth and respected her ancestors. At this moment, the so-called husband looked at her with disgust in his eyes. "See Princein," Yi Qingqing said with a dignified salute, neither humble nor overbearing. "Get up." Xiao Qingze, tired of his dignified daughter's appearance, waved impatiently. "Where have you been from this palace? You haven't returned all night." "Your Highness, where do you think I went if I haven't returned all night?" Yi Qingqing stood up straight and looked over with a clear black color. "I naturally went back to the side garden where I should have gone." On the way, she thought that even though she had reason for the groom's matter, it was not easy for her to actively get involved. Moreover, judging from the expressions of everyone, it seemed that there was no abnormality. Perhaps the groom woke up and found out that he had caused trouble and left first. If she admitted it, she couldn't explain it clearly. Women who marry into the Eastern Palace, except for being unified in the Eastern Palace's main courtyard on their wedding night, have their own courtyards at all other times. As a woman who has been waiting for her newlywed husband to return, it is understandable that she has returned to her own secluded home. "Did you go back to Pianyuan?" Xiao Qingze was taken aback for a moment and then became furious. "Last night was a wedding night. You didn't stay in your new house peacefully, but went back to your own Pianyuan. What do people think of this palace?" The wedding night is an important moment for the continuation of the royal family's offspring, and it has a subtle meaning. Throughout history, even if the relationship is not harmonious, the bride will stay until the rooster crows at dawn on the wedding night. Yi Qingqing's demeanor is clearly embarrassing to him. If anyone finds out, his wife, who left her new room in the middle of the night, where should she put her face? "Why do you return to Pianyuan?" "Your Highness doesn't know in his heart." Yi Qingqing's dark eyes stared at people. "On the wedding night, I stayed alone in my new house, and the outside and inside were quiet. Even if I don't return to Pianyuan, outsiders should know that nothing happened last night." Bold. Xiao Qingze patted the table. "Where is this palace going?" "There's no need to explain it to you." "Master, it's not worth it to calm down. My sister is being spoiled by her parents at home, and some of her small personalities are natural." "Sister, you are also a married girl. You should consider your husband as the top priority, and never be as reckless as before. Please apologize to me." A soft voice sounded, and Yi Qingqing looked up at the woman who had been standing behind Xiao Qingze. That woman has a face that is 7 times similar to hers, but 3 times more alluring than her. She is dressed in luxurious clothes and jewelry, and it is her sister, Yi Qingqing. As soon as she spoke, Xiao Qingze softened his emotions, and his gaze was full of affection. Yi Qingqing laughed at herself in her heart. It was clear that these two people were not hiding anything from each other when they got along. Why was she so foolish in her previous life? Be wholeheartedly good to others. Even Xiao Qingze's occasional punches and kicks were just right for his loss of virginity. Every now and then, Yi Qingqing would advise beside her. At that time, she was too naive to be prepared for such superficial persuasion, but in reality, she was too caught off guard. Just like at this moment, although she appears to be trying to reconcile, she is actually saying that she is arrogant and does not show any understanding towards her husband. It is clear that she is just a young lady who has not yet left the cabinet. She has called out to be a master, and her posture is quite high, like a hostess. Yi Qingqing sneered, what does this mean, younger sister? Who doesn't know that the youngest daughter of the Yi family is the most favored, and the eldest daughter is foolish and not liked by her parents? Where does this spoiled little temperament come from? Yi Qingqing was taken aback for a moment, and the smile on his small face stiffened even more. What's wrong with this woman? If she said that normally, this woman would never be moved to tears. This tried and tested move is useless today. But without waiting for her to come up with a solution, she continued to speak. I know that my sister's position as the crown princess is firmly established, but she has not yet left the cabinet. If she really calls me Yi, you can close the door and shout. Shouting so naturally, those who know say it's a mutual agreement, while those who don't know should consider it as private, relative, giving, receiving. The last 4 words fell to the ground, and Yi Qingqing's face suddenly turned pale. The title, Yi, was originally used by a woman to call her husband after getting married. She shouted this way, both because she was allowed and because she wanted to show off her uniqueness. However, she did not expect the foolish person of the past to seize this handle today. Xiao Qing's face was not very good looking either. Although he had already made a lifelong pact with Yi Qingqing, he was now being called out and his face was full of resentment. He would get angry as soon as he slapped the table. However, Yi Qingqing had not finished speaking yet. Your Highness, you must be very stable. There are some things that I know about, but it's not a big deal. We are all family, so there won't be any scandals spreading. I am generally aware of this. But after all, this Eastern Palace has mixed eyes. My younger sister comes and goes all day, and if anyone turns their elbow out, it wouldn't be good to use this title as a handle. She accentuated the pronunciation with some meaning. The other princes don't matter, it's just that if the newly awakened emperor finds out and provokes Dragon Yan's anger, the matter will be big. Xiao Qingze seemed lost in thought. When discussing marriage, his preferred candidate was not this foolish Miss Yi, but who could have imagined that on the day Miss Yi entered the palace as a candidate, she only walked around in front of her father's bed, and the father, who had been unconscious for 3 days, actually moved his finger. On the day of the wedding, father woke up and his health has been improving day by day. If it weren't for the rushed arrival of this joyful wedding, father might have been able to stand up and preside over it directly. Anyway, my father is very satisfied with this woman at this moment. When he decided this morning, he even said to wait for his health to improve and bring him to take a look. If someone takes advantage of it at this moment, the consequences are not what he wants to see. Anger found an excuse, and there was a reason to disperse. Xiao Qingze waved his hand and said, "All right, there's no need to say too much. You just remember that you stole your sister's position. In the future, you should learn more in dealing with people and things." "Thank you, Your Highness." Yi Qingqing nodded perfunctorily. "If there's nothing else, will I go back to rest?" After the crisis, staying here again would actually make her feel unhappy. It's better to leave early. Go ahead. Xiao Qingze deserved to be happy, but Yi Qingqing felt uncomfortable in his heart. The crown prince has always favored her. In the past, she wanted the moon but not the sun. Today, she is clearly prepared to hold her accountable to the end, but now she gently lets go. She is really unwilling, and the jealousy in her eyes is almost impossible to hide. She watched as Yi Qingqing deftly turned around, and the sunlight outside happened to fall on her. Something dark flashed away from her chest under her neck. That's Yi Qingqing's eyes were full of excitement. She pounced and loudly said, "Sister, why are you injured in the chest? Let me see now." As she spoke, she pulled open Yi Qingqing's collar, and suddenly, a dark, snow-white red mark was particularly glaring. Chapter 4. Old Man Dares to Request a Physical Examination. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Yi Qingqing had already raised his guard when he heard the footsteps, but whether he couldn't keep up or was caught. The outfit Gu Ningxing gave was conservative and did not show much spring sunshine, but his anger erupted and could never be stopped. Pop. Yi Qingqing fiercely pinched Yi Qingqing's tiger mouth with one hand to force him to let go, and the other hand slapped him in the face. This palm was not insignificant, but in the blink of an eye, a palm print appeared on Yi Qingqing's delicate face. She covered her face in disbelief and said, You hit me. This slap, you have no rules and regulations, dare to act recklessly in front of His Highness the Crown Prince. Yi Qingqing's pretty face was icy cold, and her words fell to the ground with a heavy slap. This slap is disrespectful to your etiquette, and it's not appropriate to touch your elder sister. The palm tingled slightly, and Yi Qingqing remained calm. He changed his hand and slapped again, saying, This slap is disrespectful to you. Your mother is a ceremonial official, and you have been taught by her to behave improperly outside. You have lost your mother's face. The reason is chaotic, the palms are numb, but my heart feels a lot more refreshed. The resentment of being cut by thousands of knives in my past life seems to have dissipated a lot. She was very fortunate at the moment that she had been raised on the farm since childhood, and had done a lot of farm work and strength. However, after 3 slaps, her sister's face had swollen into a pig's head. Having had a good time, Yi Qingqing straightened his messy sleeves and looked down at Yi Qingqing, saying, Do you know you're wrong? Xiao Qingze finally regained his senses and quickly got up to help, his eyes filled with heartache. Seeing that he was about to speak up and accuse, Yi Qingqing stroked her hem and knelt down, saying, My younger sister has made a mistake, and my elder sister should have committed the same crime. Please allow me, Your Highness, to share half of the blame with my younger sister. The words lingered on his lips for a while, and Xiao Qingze was unable to utter them. Although he dotes on the second miss of the Yi family, he has his own considerations in his heart. Although his father is seriously ill, he will not meditate for a while. He has not yet secured his position, so he should be more careful in his actions. Today, he will continue to investigate a few tricks, which will inevitably make outsiders see a joke and give rise to unnecessary details. If he has intentions, he will just let it go. Yi Qingqing didn't understand what he was thinking in his heart. She was pampered, and even this sister was only brought back when she was close to her age. She couldn't bear to see her, and after being beaten, her mind was full of thoughts about her past shame. He immediately pulled his sleeve and cried, Sister, why are you so aggressive? I only saw a red mark on your chest and was worried if you were injured after not returning all night. That's why I wanted to see if sister had any unspeakable secrets. She shouldn't have let me suffer this injustice for nothing. Imprint. Xiao Qingze's eyes turned cold. Before the crown prince and his concubines enter the palace, they all undergo physical examinations, and the birthmarks cannot hide from the eyes of the palace maids. Where does this mark come from? Red is still such a prominent color. Last night I didn't come back all night. Was it? His face turned completely cold as he looked at Yi Qingqing with questioning in his eyes. Where did the mark on your body come from? When I passed by the forest on my way back to Pianyuan, I only took a bite from a mosquito. Yi Qingqing felt a little guilty, but not very afraid. Apply some medicine and it will take a few days to get rid of it. If your highness doesn't believe it, you can go to the inner room and I'll let your highness see it with his own eyes. Yesterday's conversation with Gu Ningzheng was more of a mutual venting than a love affair between men and women. Gu Ningzheng seemed to have a bit of a cleanliness fetish and never said anything, but his nails were slightly longer and he made a mark on her chest. Even if you show it to someone with your own eyes, you can never see anything unusual. I checked carefully when changing clothes, and now it has become her confidence. You're talking nonsense. Yi Qingqing just saw the mark clearly, then thought of the medicine from last night and the unknown groom, and confirmed that the mark must be a sign of love. He immediately bit and refused to let go. I saw that mark clearly, it was something that only comes with doing that. If you don't believe it, find a nanny to undergo a physical examination and see if she is a virgin. It's easy to tell. As soon as these words were spoken, Xiao Qingze's face darkened by 3 points and his attitude also cooled down. There is evidence to capture the appearance, which is different from directly biting to death. Yi Qingqing's confident appearance forcefully pushed him to a difficult position to get off. It's not like checking, it's not like not checking. Yi Qingqing's heart tightened, but her face dared not show any discord. Without taking the test, she only looked shocked and said, "Sister, how could you, a girl who hasn't left the cabinet, know all this?" Yi Qingqing's words were blocked, and her mind finally came to a clear understanding. The things she had been doing with the crown prince were naturally unspeakable, and her silence clearly made everyone aware of the truth. The eyes of those around me were already filled with contempt. Perhaps she is the appointed first talented woman in the capital, but if such matters concerning her daughter's chastity are spread, she will be completely ruined. I. She hesitated for a while, but didn't say anything. In the end, she covered her face and sobbed like she had given up on herself. Xiao Qingze was 2 heads tall, and his gaze no longer had the same deep affection as before, with a hint of annoyance. After observing his words and expressions, Yi Qingqing decided to put it aside as soon as possible. It was the right way to expose this matter as soon as possible. If there were really suspicions, he would find someone to test himself, and this matter would not be hidden. She sighed helplessly and said, "It's my fault for this matter. Perhaps it was when my grandmother taught me how to play together that I casually said a few words. My younger sister has always been intelligent, and I'm afraid she remembered all of them. If your highness wants to blame me, then blame me. This is my dereliction of duty, and I voluntarily accept the punishment." With the steps up, Xiao Qingze was busy about to come down and say, "When my daughter plays at home, she talks nonsense. We're all from our own family here, so there's no reason to punish her. You can't do it again next time." At this moment, he saw that his concubine was much more pleasing to the eye, and his face softened. He knew the way to be gentle, so he immediately looked at Yi Qingqing and said, "Thank you to the Qing. If it weren't for your sister's presence today, it would be easy to treat you as impolite." Just as Yi Qingqing was about to speak politely, he heard a familiar voice behind him. Qingqing has been discussing marriage recently, and happened to meet with the palace to teach Grandma Shi. I followed suit and taught some. The Empress also knows about this matter. In front of everyone's eyes, the mistress of the Yi family entered the room and her shrewd calculating eyes scanned the room. At the next moment, she respectfully bowed to Xiao Qingze and said in a clear tone, "But the words have been spoken, and everyone has heard them. If we lightly expose them, outsiders will damage our reputation, whether it's for Qingqing or Qingqing. I dare to ask your highness to invite Sister Shi to undergo an examination for my disrespectful eldest daughter, in order to correct my hearing and hearing." After speaking, she looked at Yi Qingqing with a charitable expression, but her eyes were full of clear contempt. If it were fair and upright, I would be fearless. Chapter 1. It smells so good. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the room covered in joyful cloth, red candles are burning high. This should have been a lively wedding room, but at this moment, except for the bride lying in bed, who is absent-minded, there is actually no one. The bride slept restlessly, tossing and turning. "Mom, no, don't give up on me, Mom. No. No." Suddenly, a scream pierced through the long night, and Yi Qingqing suddenly sat up, her eyes filled with sorrow, tears pouring down her face. Why? They are all daughters of their mothers, why could they give up on their younger sister? Did she lose her virginity on her wedding day? But that was clearly framed. The punishment of countless cuts is really painful. Yi Qingqing instinctively lowered her head and rubbed her wrist, but her tactile sensation made her stiff all over. Her hands. Her hand was cut off by the crown prince himself on the second day of her wedding, wasn't it? Even the imperial physician said it would never be possible to connect again. But now. Yi Qingqing looked at her hands, although they were slightly rough and not at all white, tender, and smooth, they were truly there. Looking at her body again, she clearly saw her whole body being shaved to the point of white bones, so painful that she couldn't bear to call out to the onlookers next to her. But now, dressed in joyful attire, her bones and flesh were evenly proportioned, and there was no trace of such a tragic appearance left. Is this a dream? Or, can't even heaven see through it? Give her a chance. The swaying red candle emitted a beeping sound, accompanied by the sound of the door being gently pushed open. He, the young lady of the Yi family, although not as talented as the second young lady, has such a delicate face. The dirty black hand brushed against her cheek, and Yi Qingqing woke up from a dream. She fiercely pushed the dirty hand away and said, "Get out." Looking up for a moment, hatred surged in my eyes. The groom. The groom who defiled her and falsely accused her in front of everyone that she had taken the initiative to seduce and was ultimately killed by her in court. Resurrection of the dead. Ha ha ha. Yi Qingqing couldn't help but look up and laugh, wondering if it was fate who had the eye to call her back to this wedding night, to this tragic source. The seductive woman in red laughed recklessly and looked like a ghost. The groom was momentarily stunned and dared not move. Isn't it true that this young lady is naturally foolish, has a gentle temperament, and doesn't dare to speak out if something goes wrong? This is different from what is rumored. The joy in her heart was suddenly interrupted by the restless heat coming from under her body. In a moment of low moaning, Yi Qingqing reacted and the medicine took effect. In her past life, she realized something was wrong. She went out to find someone, but as soon as she stepped into the door, she was knocked unconscious. When she woke up again, the groom lay next to her, and the contemptuous expressions of the people around her were unforgettable in her lifetime. In this life, we cannot repeat the same mistakes. The groom was obviously someone who had prescribed meat before. As soon as he heard her voice, he knew it was the medicine that had broken out. His face lit up with joy and he said, "Miss, please don't push it. If you feel uncomfortable, I also feel uncomfortable. The crown prince hasn't returned to the palace today, so why not? We are both comfortable." Did the crown prince not return to the palace? Yes, the worship hall is always a substitute for passing the stage. If it weren't for that, how could anyone be so bold as to seduce the newly married woman in the East Palace? The heat inside the body waves after waves, eroding the mind. No matter how firm Yi Qingqing's mind is, there will always be a moment of confusion. No, we can't stay here anymore. The person who drugged her has a backup, we need to leave here. She seized the opportunity and dodged as the groom pounced, pushing down the standing lamp by the bed. After a heavy muffled noise, the groom's expression froze and he fell unconscious on the wedding bed. Good opportunity. Yi Qingqing hurriedly went to open the door, but withdrew her hand as soon as she touched the door. Can't go out. In my previous life, I was knocked unconscious as soon as I left the house, and I'm not sure if there were still people squatting outside. Her eyes wandered around the room before finally landing on the back window. Coming out from here, not far from the cold pool, the medicinal properties could not be relieved, but perhaps it could ease them a bit. Perhaps it was good luck that along the way, there were no patrolling guards at all. The smoke-filled area ahead was the cold pool, and before approaching, one could feel the chill. With a pause in her footsteps, Yi Qingqing hesitated a bit. She jumped down and couldn't cure the effects of the medicine, but a serious illness was inevitable. However, when she thought about the outcome of her past life, her eyes became firm again. What's sick? She wants to live. Live a lifetime, endure the hardships she has endured, and she will repay those who have humiliated her even more. She lifted her feet and was about to enter the cold pool, but heard a gust of wind in her ear. The next moment, a cold hand grabbed her neck and lifted her up. The suffocation was overwhelming, and Yi Qingqing lowered her head in fear and met a pair of red eyes. When she saw the other person's face clearly, her heart turned to ashes. 9,000 years old, Gu Ningzheng. Although he was a eunuch, he was the undisputed ruler of the entire harem. This cold pool was dug by him to escape the heat, and even the emperor did not stop him. This person has always been arrogant and domineering, and his temperament is unpredictable. If he falls into his hands, he will die or die. She reached out with difficulty, wanting to scratch Gu Ningzheng's eyes. After working hard for half a day, she could only scratch a few white marks on the other person's eyes while building round nails. The strength in his throat kept increasing, and Gu Ningzheng was really going to kill her. Are you about to be killed as soon as you have a chance to be reborn? She's not willing. She's not willing. Her dying desire for survival made her grab the other person's wrist and bite hard with her mouth open. At the moment when the bloody smell entered her mouth, the force on her neck relaxed. The next moment, Gu Ningzheng leaned in and sniffed her neck. She didn't dare to move, although she didn't know what the other person was going to do. It was obvious that he had an interest in her. For someone like Gu Ningzheng, disturbing his interest will inevitably lead to a dead end. The force in her throat gradually relaxed until it was completely released, but Yi Qingqing dared not take a big breath. The man's hot breath lingered behind his head, on the side of his neck. She is actually a yellow flower girl, already blushing and hearing red. Worst of all, the medicinal properties that were forced to retreat on the brink of death are making a comeback at this moment, igniting a fire from her lower abdomen and rushing straight to her heart. The man's deep voice awakened Yi Qingqing's mind. She stared in confusion for a while before realizing it. The man's body was cold, and she groggily rubbed against it. She wanted to step back, but one arm pulled over her waist from behind and then pushed her hard forward. The rich sandalwood fragrance surged into her nose, and Gu Ningzheng seemed to sigh something in her ear. The next moment, her cold lips covered her neck, causing waves of trembling. The hot and dry heat rushed forward, completely devouring all the senses. The sound of water in the cold pool echoed all night, and Yi Qingqing looked at the full moon swaying above her head in a daze. It wasn't until the moon sank in the west that a sentence came to her in her drowsy mind. The first sentence said by Gu Ningzheng, "It smells so good." Chapter 6. Humiliation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Yi Qingqing saw the person in the dog cage and his pupils contracted violently, but he quickly calmed down and denied it. What are you talking nonsense about? I have never seen this person before. Seeing her make up her mind and refuse to admit it, Gu Ningzheng didn't panic either. Is that so? I saw his lips slightly raised, and his slender eyes glanced at the person in the dog cage. The sword in his hand seemed to unintentionally tap on the dog cage beside him. Just this action made the groom in the dog cage suddenly change his face. He showed fear on his face, trembling and kneeling on the ground, constantly seeking help in the direction of Yi Qingqing. Miss Eyre, I don't want to die. Please help me. As Yi Qingqing watched the groom panic and refused to speak, he raised his throat and gritted his teeth in anger. Shut up. In front of His Highness the Crown Prince, do you dare to talk nonsense? Do you think you have lived too long? There is a hint of threat between the words. But at this moment, the groom couldn't listen at all. It's too scary. Gu Ningzheng is really terrifying. The groom dared not conceal anything and quickly explained everything he had done in detail. Miss Eyre, why are you defaulting on your debts? Yesterday, it was clear that Miss Eyre gave me 10 taels of silver, asking me to ruin the innocence of the concubine. I was momentarily confused and agreed to Miss Eyre. As soon as he finished speaking, he sensed Xiao Qing's slightly murderous gaze and couldn't help but tremble, quickly explaining. However, I didn't succeed. I didn't expect that the concubine would be tough and fight to save her innocence. Afterwards, I was scared and wanted to escape with the money, but I was still caught on the way. Miss Eyre, as you said, you will save my life no matter what. You can't go back and forth. I don't want this silver at all. Please help me. The groom wept bitterly and kept kowtowing to Yi Qingqing. Not bad. Although the concubine has multiple scars on her body, she is still a perfect body, said Grandma Jiao, she standing beside her in a timely voice as evidence this was like a heavy blow, hitting Yi Qingqing's heart. How could this be possible? The words of the groom and the tutor pushed Yi Qingqing directly onto the edge of the blade, and everyone's eyes gathered towards her. Yi Qingqing swallowed his saliva with a guilty heart, shook his head, and retreated backwards. No, it's not like that, it's slander. Perhaps due to impatience, her voice became sharp and piercing at this moment. After a moment, she suddenly turned her head to look at Yi Qingqing and gritted her teeth, saying, "It's you, right? You colluded with him to get everything done. What's spending money on murder? It's all you directing and acting. If you want to splash dirty water on me, I'll tell you, there's no way." Yi Qingqing suppressed his hatred from the bottom of his heart, and a hint of disappointment appeared on his face. She gave a cold smile and her face became increasingly pale. "I separated from my younger sister since I was young, and I thought that as long as I treated her well enough, she would accept me. I didn't expect my younger sister to be so intolerant of me. In that case, I followed her wishes." After finishing speaking, Yi Qingqing turned around and gritted her teeth secretly, fiercely hitting the pillar on one side. When acting, it's natural to make it more realistic. Gu Ningzheng's sword eyebrows furrowed slightly, his lips tightened, and he watched as Yi Qingqing was about to collide with a pillar. He dodged directly in front of Yi Qingqing and stopped the person. Seeing that Yi Qingqing was unharmed, Gu Ningzheng instinctively moved away and reached out to brush off the creases on his body. Lazy eyes turned to Xiao Qingze, reminding him. As soon as the concubine was welcomed into the palace, she was forced to death. If these words were to be spread, regardless of whether the emperor held him accountable, even the common people would only feel that the crown prince was incompetent, which would cause unrest in the harem. This remark can be seen as poking at Xiao Qingze's sore spot. As the crown prince, carrying such a reputation is not good for him. His gaze wandered between the two for a moment, and if it weren't for Gu Ningzheng being a eunuch, he would have doubted if there was anything between them. Gu Ningzheng is right. Nowadays, Shi Shining is the best choice. After thinking for a moment, Xiao Qingze could only grit his teeth and agree to accept. Anyway, this matter has been investigated by our palace and it's a misunderstanding. Let's get it over with. As he spoke, he wanted to shake his sleeves and leave. Unexpectedly, Gu Ningzheng's eyes narrowed slightly, his face half smiling, and he called out to him with a faint voice. "Wait a minute. Has your highness the crown prince forgotten something?" Xiao Qingze's footsteps paused, and his face darkened a bit. He turned around, squinted his eyes, and stared straight at Gu Ningzheng, his tongue secretly pressing against his posterior alveolar ridge, squeezing out a few words from between his teeth. "Gu Ningzheng, don't take any advantage." Gu Ningzheng seemed to be unable to hear the anger in his words, his gaze darkening as he stared at Yi Qingqing beside him, curling his lips and sneering. The groom and the teaching grandmother are human witnesses, and the silver found during the search is physical evidence. Now that both human and physical evidence are present, the crown prince, as the crown prince, should pay more attention to etiquette and law. "Just a misunderstanding, why do you want to expose this matter?" As soon as these words were spoken, Yi Qingqing was also stunned for a moment. Is he standing up for himself? No, it's impossible. He is 9,000 years old, and he didn't have time to kill her. How could he help her? Yi Qingqing's heart was filled with a wave of entanglement, and her eyes became a bit complicated. Entangled by the cold gaze, Yi Qingqing couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart. She tightly gripped the handkerchief in her hand and couldn't help but lean towards Xiao Qingze. At this moment, Xiao Qingze was in a fit of anger. How could he have time to pay attention to Yi Qingqing? "So, what should I do in this palace?" His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, believed in slander and wrongly accused the concubine. He should give the concubine an explanation in both emotion and reason. As for the malicious intentions of the person who instigated it, why not ban it for more than a month as a warning? Gu Ningzheng's delicate face was like a celestial being in the sunlight. His thin lips parted lightly, and his tone was lazy and unrestrained. Although he respectfully referred to Xiao Qingze as His Royal Highness, there was no hint of fear in his words. Xiao Qingze turned his head and glanced at Yi Qingqing, feeling a hint of disgust in his heart for some reason. Although Gu Ningzheng may appear calm on the surface, he is actually a person who never stops until he achieves his goals. Under pressure, Xiao Qingze had to suppress his anger and do as he said. The concubine was wronged and given 1,000 gold brocades to soothe her heart. Yi Qingqing slandered the elder sister, and her virtue was at fault. From now on, she will be banned from entering the mansion. Gu Ningzheng's lips curved on one side, revealing a satisfied smile. But Xiao Qingze's smile was very glaring. The crown prince, surprisingly, was coerced here by a eunuch. Xiao Qingze's anger could not be relieved and he could only sneer. It's really ridiculous that a eunuch should delude himself into cherishing her beauty. After saying these words, Xiao Qingze shook his sleeves and left. Yi Qingqing bit his lower lip tightly and quickly chased after him. In a moment, everyone in the room followed closely and dispersed. Despite being ridiculed by Xiao Qingze, Gu Ningzheng showed no signs of anger. Instead, he gazed at her with great interest and leaned closer to her. Miss Yi performed well, it's not in vain for me to have worked so hard. However, Yi Qingqing not only did not show gratitude, but also took a cautious step back, with countless thoughts in his heart. To put it simply, she only had a chance encounter with Gu Ningzheng. Why did he bother to help her again? If it's just for detoxification, she's not the only one who can make incense in the vast world. Chapter 7. Threats. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Thank you very much, Mr. Gu, for helping me out today. I have never liked to owe anyone anything. In a while, I will personally make some incense and send it to you. However, she changed her tone and spoke politely. To put it bluntly, Mr. Gu and I are currently in a cooperative relationship, and we each take what we need. If Mr. Gu wants to take advantage of this opportunity to control me, it's better to let this heart die as soon as possible. Interesting. Gu Ningzheng's slender eyes suddenly narrowed, staring intently at Yi Qingqing. Suddenly, he took a step forward and raised her wrist above her head, pressing it against the pillar, and the entire living space was facing the lower path. I had a rare kindness, but I never expected Miss Yi to think of me so much. It's really chilling. With a slightly sickly tone, Yi Qingqing couldn't help but swallow her saliva. But she has already died once. If she can't live according to her own wishes in this life, it's better to just die. Yi Qingqing frowned slightly and desperately tried to pull her hand away. Seeing the red marks on her wrist, there was no sign of compromise. Gu Ningzheng's eyes flickered with a hint of emotion, and his clamped hand relaxed slightly. Yi Qingqing escaped instantly, took a few steps to one side, straightened his back, and explained. Even without Lord Gu today, I wouldn't have let myself fall into an unbearable situation and let them insult me. Upon hearing this, a hint of surprise flashed in Gu Ningzheng's eyes. In that situation just now, if it weren't for him breaking the game, perhaps only death would have saved her reputation. Is it because she wants to use death to show her aspirations? In addition to being shocked, Gu Ningzheng also faintly became curious about her. What exactly did she experience to have such thoughts? However, he was not someone who gossiped. After a sigh, he brushed off Yi Qingqing's shoulder. It's better to live a good life than to die well. Instead of thinking about how to die with dignity, it's better to think about how to bring the enemy to hell together and enjoy it. After finishing speaking, before Yi Qingqing could reply, Gu Ningzheng raised his eyebrows, gave her a sidelong glance, and made an invitation. Coincidentally, I am going to bring this person to the Ministry of Justice for punishment. Should we go and watch it together? Upon hearing these words, Yi Qingqing glanced at the trembling groom in the dog cage. It was because of him in her past life that she had her hands chopped off and became a useless person for life. How could she not hate him in her heart? Just as she was about to nod in agreement, a figure suddenly burst in. Bitch! Immediately after, a palm wind came towards her door. Gu Ningzheng had noticed Yi Mu's movements for a long time, but he did not take action for a long time. Yi Qingqing squinted her eyes and could barely dodge. Lord Gu, there are still family matters to handle today, so I won't keep you any longer. I will come to my door to thank you another day. As the saying goes, family shame should not be exposed, and Yi Qingqing also had many words in her heart that she wanted to ask Ye's mother personally. Farewell. Gu Ningzheng bent his lips and strode towards the outside with a shooting star. The guard behind carried a dog cage and followed closely behind. Seeing that there were no outsiders in the room, Yi Qingqing pursed her lips and asked coldly. Mother went back and forth, not only not caring about her daughter, but also fighting back and forth. Do you think my sister's punishment is too lenient? This is like poking at Yi Mu's heart. She suddenly became furious and stopped speaking. Shut up. Qin Qin, she is innocent. If it weren't for you stealing her husband, why would she slander you? In a few words, the fault of this matter was shifted onto her. My heart is so cold. But she should have understood long ago that her mother doesn't love her. Yi Qingqing's heart felt as if it was being torn apart, the pain unbearable, and her eyes also turned slightly red. But Yi Mu in front of her not only didn't notice her abnormality, but also stepped forward and grabbed her sleeve, threatening. You colluded with outsiders and ruined Qin Qin's reputation. Are you trying to ruin the Yi family? Go and admit your mistake to His Highness the Crown Prince now, and beg His Highness to lift Qin Qin's foot ban. Otherwise, I won't have your daughter. As her words fell, Yi Qingqing's heart was completely torn apart. She sneered and shook off Yi Mu's hand, saying no. This matter is not my fault. Why should I admit unfounded charges? Do you still want to shield her now? Upon hearing this, Yi Mu was taken aback. Yi Qingqing has always been a soft-tempered person. It's too late to please her on a daily basis. When did she ever choke? Before Ye's mother could react, Yi Qingqing continued to ask coldly. For so many years, I have been thinking, my sister and I are both your daughters. Why did you always favor your sister from childhood to adulthood, hitting and scolding me as if I were your enemy? Tell me, why on earth? This statement seemed to evoke memories of Yi Mu. Her eyes flickered for a moment, but soon they returned to their original state, and she frowned and answered. What are you talking nonsense about? When did I hit or curse at you? As she spoke, she seemed to have some confidence and instead started cursing at Yi Qingqing. Yi Qingqing, since you were a child, most of you like to fight with Qin Qin. I didn't care about it before, but today you want to ruin Qin Qin's reputation. I will never allow such a thing to happen. If you don't admit your mistakes today, our Yi family can't tolerate you, a white-eyed wolf who disregards sister's feelings. Is this to drive her out of the Yi family? Okay, drive out the Yi family. At least she won't have any expectations. Yi Qingqing's eyes flickered with madness, and he sneered contemptuously. Let my mother die with this heart. I won't admit it wrong. Looking at her current appearance, Yi Mu felt something vaguely out of her control, and her anger grew even stronger. But soon, Yi Mu came up with a plan. Okay, if you don't apologize and plead with His Highness the Crown Prince today, I won't live either. I'll hang myself in your courtyard today. As she spoke, Yi Mu was about to walk out. If Lady Yi kills herself in the Eastern Palace, the entire Yi family will probably be irreparable. Before a person arrives, the sound arrives first. The two of them looked at Gu Ningzheng in a voice that seemed to smile rather than smile, and saw a few more bloodstains on his face. A drop of blood fell in front of him, like a blood-red tear mole, making him even more stunning. But the key is not here, but in his hands. The huge head in his hand was staring intently, which was the head of the groom locked in the dog cage. Gu Ningzheng extended his fair thumb and gently wiped away the blood splattered at the corner of his mouth, revealing a bloodthirsty smile. Then, leisurely walking in. Upon seeing this, Yi Mu was shocked in her heart. Although Yi Qingqing had long known that this scumbag was crazy, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Looking at the dead groom, Yi Mu remembered Yi Qingqing, who had been banned from the Yi mansion, and suddenly felt resentful. Her gaze towards Gu Ningzheng also became unfriendly. What kind of behavior does a mere eunuch dare to enter and exit the backyard of the Eastern Palace at will? I will go to the Crown Prince and say, treat you with disrespect. As soon as these words were spoken, Yi Qingqing couldn't help but feel nervous and was eager to speak up to stop them. But Gu Ningzheng is 9,000 years old, how could he let Yi Mu insult him? I saw him lift the head in his hand, take out a handkerchief from his pocket, wipe off the bloodstains on the groom's face, and walk slowly while wiping. Yi Fu can go and say it, but Mrs. Ye's words make me very unhappy. What about a mere eunuch? If it really angers me, Miss Yi Air may not be as simple as banning her feet. Chapter 2. Where did you hang out? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sir, there's an accident in the Eastern Palace. The new concubine who entered the palace yesterday is missing. If you don't see it, it's gone. What's the rush? Yi Qingqing was awakened by the sound of conversation. She lifted her eyes, facing those gloomy and indifferent eyes. Everything from last night was coming back to her mind at this moment. The man's thin waist and powerful movements made her come to life with every move. Crown Prince's concubine, how long will you be sitting with me? The ambiguous tone carries an inexplicable killing intent. Yi Qingqing regained her senses and hurriedly wanted to come down. As soon as she lifted her leg, she couldn't help but hiss. When something warm moved between her legs, her expression froze. 9,000-year-old Gu Ningzheng, isn't he a eunuch? How could, it seems that the concubine has noticed. The man's tone was light, but his eyes were cold and lifeless, revealing the fact that he was feeling unhappy at the moment. Slender and pale fingers brushed against the delicate side of her face, and her deep voice sounded like a lover's murmur, issuing a death ultimatum, Empress, how do you like to die? Yi Qingqing's heart was icy cold. It was easy to escape the fate of being tarnished and surrounded by others, but it offended the least troublesome man in the entire palace, and even revealed his greatest secret. There is no man in the harem, a fake eunuch, that's a capital offense. And knowing that he is a fake eunuch, she doesn't need to think about being killed and silenced at all. But she doesn't want to die. Yi Qingqing tried to show her loyalty, but without hesitation, she spoke with a tearful tone, choking her up to the point where she could hardly speak. She was too afraid of pain, and countless cuts were just one of the many punishments under Gu Ningzheng's command. She really didn't want to die in such a painful way anymore. Do you want to beg for mercy? Gu Ningzheng looked at the woman in front of him with interest. The concubine of the Eastern Palace, the eldest lady of the Yi family, seemed quite foolish compared to the second lady. At this moment, she even wanted to beg for mercy. Her loyalty, he doesn't believe it, the best way to shut up is to become a dead person. But for the sake of the occasional spring breeze, he can give a small favor. Do you have any last words? You can tell me, Gu Ningzheng caressed the wound on her lips, thinking casually. It turned out that he also had a desire to make people look like this. I can detoxify you. Yi Qingqing choked up for a long time before saying a complete sentence. The man patiently waited for a long time, but didn't realize that what was waiting was not begging for mercy. Gu Ningzheng's movements paused, squinted his eyes, and his scrutinizing gaze fell on the face of the person across from him. Poison. How could such a little girl know the poison on her body? Isn't it claimed to be exclusive to the royal family? No, the poison on him is extremely secretive. The imperial physician in the palace cannot see it, and the divine doctors in the martial arts world cannot even see a trace. But this girl actually knows that he is poisoned. The man's face was uncertain, and Yi Qingqing knew that this sentence had worked. She took advantage of the heat and said, "Does the poison on your body lose its sanity every time it attacks?" "It was the same last night. If I hadn't alleviated your poison, how could you have recovered?" Gu Ningzheng looked at her for a long time and withdrew his hand. He could see that the person in front of him was not lying. When he was poisoned, he would lose his sanity, and even his most loyal subordinates would not dare to approach him easily. However, last night he was poisoned, but his sanity was restored midway, and even thus revealing his biggest secret. Does she really have a way? Have you studied medicine? Yi Qingqing hesitated for a moment when he heard the words, but honestly shook his head and said, "No." "Are you sure you can completely detoxify me?" Gu Ningzheng didn't get angry and continued to ask. Yi Qingqing shook her head and said, "No, I don't know what the poison on your body is, so naturally there's no way to find an antidote." Gu Ningzheng laughed angrily and placed his palm on the slender neck of the little girl, saying, "So, are you playing with me?" "No," Yi Qingqing quickly shook her head, afraid that she would be choked to death if she was one step too late. "I can make incense. My master once said that there are not only healers who can detoxify, but also two types of poisonous incense. The healer uses medicine to pound the roots, while the poison uses poison to attack the poison. Unlike the previous two, the fragrance has the ability to clear the heart and clear the lungs, and over time, the toxicity self-eliminates without damaging the foundation." Gu Ningzheng heard this statement for the first time, instinctively not believing it, but thinking about the changes in his body last night, he felt a little more moved in his heart. He frowned and wanted to inquire more, but the guards from outside came to report again. "Sir, there is a commotion in the Eastern Palace." Yi Qingqing's heart tightened. She left in a hurry last night and didn't have time to tidy up her new house. The person behind the scenes must have already brought someone to try to stop her at this moment. Although the matter of adultery is already a myth, the fact that there is a groom lying in the new house and the bride is nowhere to be seen is enough for the public to punish him. She needs to go back as soon as possible, otherwise it will change. "Gu Ningzheng, just let me go back." Yi Qingqing reached out and grabbed the hand that was placed around her neck, her eyes full of sincerity. "Nothing happened last night, I promise." He spoke very sincerely, with a clear sense of ownership. The little girl's voice was soft and sticky, and the sound of calling out her name was a bit more seductive than last night. Gu Ningzheng sneered lightly and his eyes turned in people's hearts. "This doesn't look like nothing happened. The little girl looks young, but she is well taken care of." Yi Qingqing was taken aback, instinctively covering her chest, but her heart was filled with fear. She heard that Gu Ningzheng had no intention of killing her, but he just temporarily did not pursue it. "Let's go out." Gu Ningzheng's voice was faint, with a hint of mockery. "Wait a little longer, people are coming here." Yi Qingqing instinctively stood up and had to go up to the edge of the pool to remember. Last night, their movements were too rough, and their clothes were torn apart. At this moment, she had nothing but a belly bag all over her body. How could she get out? She turned her head to borrow, and in the spare time, she caught a glimpse of the neatly stacked clothes by the pool, which were women's style. Obviously, it has already been placed there. So, Gu Ningzheng had no intention of killing her at all. Such thoughts flashed through her mind and were then forgotten. Regardless of whether the man has the intention to kill her or not, at least the two of them have reached an agreement on their intentions at this moment. Next, there is still a difficult hurdle to overcome. How can she explain to others about the groom in the new house and the overnight absence? After thinking for a while, she couldn't come up with a reason. However, the East Palace was already in front of her, and the Crown Prince's personal guard stood at the door. As soon as she saw her, she hurriedly announced to the inside. It was too late to turn back. Yi Qingqing bit her lip and bravely entered the room. As soon as the door was pushed open, a vase hit her and landed accurately at her feet, shattering into pieces. At the same time, a mournful male voice rang out, "Concubine Yi is so bold. Where did she hang out all night?" Chapter 10. Causes. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. The daughter of Yi never enters the palace. This statement sounded like a thunderbolt, exploding in Yi Qingqing's ear. Yi Qingqing suddenly widened his eyes and angrily pinched his nails into his palm, staring fiercely at Yi Qingqing. Bitch! Even if I'm going to die, I'm not at ease. How could Xiao Qingze not know what she meant and immediately angrily retorted. Then you go die. The emperor never expected that the situation would escalate to such an extent. It's really a big deal. Seeing Xiao Qingze speak ill of him, he hit the nail on Yi Qingqing's chest. Her tears immediately fell down like broken beads. The despairing expression on one's face is not like being fake. People can't help but feel pity when they see it. She gave a self-deprecating chuckle, and her words were filled with tears and blood. Since I entered the palace, I have been neglected by your highness. When I first met your highness, I was full of joy. However, to my surprise, your highness's lack of care was enough, and I suspected that I had an affair with the groom. Her face was moist, allowing tears to fall to the ground. The palace is heavily guarded, and how did I get to know the groom? Now that my identity has been verified and the groom has also been subdued, your highness has said that I have an affair with Lord Gu. At the end, she pounded her chest and feet, and her voice became a bit hoarse. The words were all subtly pointed out, and all these calculations were directed and performed by the crown prince. The empress has been wandering in the harem for many years, how could she not even hear this unspoken message? She frowned and felt a slight displeasure in her heart. What are you talking nonsense about? A hint of panic flashed in Xiao Qingze's eyes and he quickly spoke out to scold. But now, how could Yi Qingqing fulfill his wish? If your highness truly pleased his younger sister, I would willingly fulfill your highness. However, as everyone knows, Lord Gu cannot be humane. Why should your highness use such unfounded accusations to humiliate your highness? After speaking a word, even the emperor had a criticism towards Xiao Qingze. And Yi Qingqing also stood up from the ground, with a face of despair. Since your highness cannot tolerate my concubine, I will prove my innocence by dying myself. As she spoke, she rushed towards the pillar on one side of the hall. Everyone was surprised, but it was too late to stop them. It hurts so much. Rao deliberately controlled her strength, but the pain on her forehead still made her frown uncontrollably. In an instant, blood gushed out from the forehead. Her body also collapsed on the ground along the pillar. With her movements, a fair arm was perfectly exposed. On my arm, the palace guard sand was as bright as blood. The queen naturally did not miss this detail and immediately had a decision in her heart. She turned her head and rebuked Xiao Qingze, who was standing still on the side. Bastard! Hurry up and call someone to come and treat you. As she spoke, she glanced at Yi Qingqing with a malevolent gaze. Since ancient times, kings have been the most wary of demon consorts. Now, if the crown prince can force Yi Qingqing to death for her, it is uncertain that he will still cause trouble for her in the future. But at this moment, Yi Qingqing didn't know the empress's thoughts. She stared angrily at the palace sand between Yi Qingqing's arms, tightly clasping her palm. How could this be possible? Not long after, the imperial physician hurriedly arrived and diagnosed the pulse before letting out a sigh of relief and skillfully bandaged Yi Qingqing. Seeing that Yi Qingqing was unharmed, the emperor and empress felt much more at ease. Rebel's son, today's affairs are all caused by you. Is it possible that you are dissatisfied with my will? The emperor was majestic all over, clapping his hand and scolding Xiao Qingze. Upon hearing this, Xiao Qingze's heart suddenly became flustered and he quickly knelt on the ground, shaking his head to deny it. I dare not. But after all, he is his own son, and his moral character is like a mirror in his heart. He snorted coldly and warned again. The engagement between you two was given by me personally. Your concubine is virtuous and virtuous, which is difficult to find in the world. You must treat her well. I may not pursue the previous matter, but if you dare to act recklessly in the future, I will punish you severely and not lend a loan. The emperor has said so, how dare Xiao Qingze have any objections? I saw Xiao Qingze kowtow to the emperor and repeatedly say yes. After reprimanding the crown prince, the emperor turned his gaze to Yi Qingqing, his gaze somewhat complicated. Originally, his old life was also saved by Yi Qingqing. After much thought, he deliberately ordered that Yi Qingqing be bestowed upon the crown prince, hoping that she would be treated favorably. However, he did not expect that she would suffer many injustices instead. The emperor couldn't help feeling a little guilty in his heart and let out a sigh. Concubine, I know you are suffering in your heart. This is because the crown prince is not treating you well, but he has also been blindfolded by traitors. I have also taught you a lesson now. I hope you will not have any grudges with the crown prince because of this. If this scoundrel dares to bully you again in the future, just go to the palace and tell me, and I will support you. Upon hearing these words, Yi Qingqing weakly blessed the emperor's body. Thank you, Your Majesty, my concubine. Now that the emperor has personally shown goodwill, she naturally wants to accept it, otherwise she may have the opposite effect. Seeing that Yi Qingqing knew the big picture so well, the emperor nodded in satisfaction. Xiao Qingze learned a lesson and quickly stood up, giving Yi Qingqing a weak hand, promising the emperor. I will abide by my father's teachings. In order to demonstrate the fairness of the royal family, the emperor waved his hand and directly rewarded a large amount of gold, silver, and jewelry. After thanking the favor, Yi Qingqing left the main hall with Xiao Qingze in front and behind. When she passed by Yi Qingqing standing in the same place, she paused, turned her head slightly, and spoke to her in a voice that only the two of them could hear. Yi Qingqing, the show has just begun. For some reason, upon hearing her words, Yi Qingqing's body couldn't help but tremble. When she turned to look at Yi Qingqing, she had already walked a long way out. Now that Xiao Qingze has left, it is meaningless for her to stay, so she hurriedly followed suit. Yi Qingqing, wait for me. After entering the Eastern Palace, Xiao Qingze was too lazy to pretend. After giving her a fierce glare, he returned to the Zhenyuan and even had a big temper. But these Yi Qingqing don't care. After a lifetime, she had already seen through Xiao Qingze, he was not a good person. After returning to the side garden, she sat down coldly and let out a soft drink towards her back. Bring Qinghe in. In a moment, someone answered and came in. The two of them escorted Qinghe and gave her a knee thrust, making her kneel in front of Yi Qingqing. At this moment, Qinghe's face turned earthy and his body trembled slightly. Thinking about it, as early as in the palace, she had already thought of her own ending. She stared at Qinghe with a complex expression and a hoarse voice questioning. Tell me. When were you actually bought by Yi Qingqing? Upon hearing this, Qinghe lowered his head and his lips wriggled, kowtowing incessantly towards her. Concubine, I know I was wrong. Please, please spare me. No matter how she asked, Qinghe avoided answering and kept kowtowing for mercy. Yi Qingqing's eyes were fixed on Qinghe's face, and memories of his past life flashed through his mind like a fleeting glance. She closed her eyes and a tear slipped from the corner of her eye. She's too stupid. Qinghe betrayed the master, die with a stick. Cold words spewed out from between the lips. Qinghe's body couldn't help but stiffen, and he looked up in disbelief. Miss, I was wrong. I really. Before she could finish speaking, Yi Qingqing waved his hand and asked someone to take her down. Screams of agony echoed one after another in the courtyard. Little did they know, a pair of eyes secretly captured all of this. Killing decisively, interesting. Chapter 8. Calm down. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In a few words, Yi Mu choked her mouth shut. She only focused on venting her anger for Yi Qingqing, forgetting that the character in front of her was a ruthless one. If he really angered him, let alone Yi Qingqing, the entire Yi family would probably suffer. With this in mind, Yi Mu dared not provoke Gu Ningxing anymore, so she vented her anger on Yi Qingqing, gave up her harsh words, and hurriedly left. Think carefully about what I said today. If you are stubborn, don't blame me for turning your back and not recognizing anyone. Yi Qingqing watched as Ye's mother left expressionlessly. After finally giving Yi Qingqing a lesson, how can we easily let her go? All of this has just begun. Her consciousness quickly returned, and she looked at Gu Ningxing with a complex expression. The corner of her mouth twitched slightly, frowning and pondering. Mr. Gu's hobbies are really unique. Gu Ningxing raised the head in his hand, and a hint of innocence appeared on his face. Are you saying this? I thought you wanted to see it. I brought it to you specifically, and it could be considered an explanation. I didn't expect you to misunderstand me so much. It's so sad. Give her an explanation. Why is Gu Ningxing so kind to her when even the people of Yi Mansion are eager for her death? Yi Qingqing pursed her lips tightly, her suspicious gaze wandering over Gu Ningxing. Seeing her like this, Gu Ningxing only felt amused. He casually threw his head backwards, and the guards behind him quickly caught it. Then, he approached Yi Qingqing a bit, and a warm breath sprayed on her neck, feeling a bit crispy and numb. You're such a heartless person. I'm kind enough to help you relieve your anger, but you suspect me. A good person is not worth it. As he spoke, his eyes were fixed on her fair and delicate earlobes, and he suddenly wanted to take a bite. But before he could take action, the bone-etching pain in his body came, and the veins on his neck suddenly protruded, causing him to snort. Sensing his abnormality, Yi Qingqing's heart tightened and a hint of concern appeared on her face. She looked up at him. She quickly supported his arm and asked softly. What's wrong with you? Did you have another seizure? Touching the concern in her eyes, Gu Ningxing slightly raised the corner of his mouth and joked with a pale expression. I'm not in good health, so I can only trouble you, a kind-hearted person, to save me again. Yi Qingqing didn't care to say so much, so he quickly helped him onto the bed and lit a furnace of incense. A unique aroma wafted into Gu Ningxing's nose one by one. It's like a dry heart suddenly flowing into a pool of clear water, making people feel incredibly comfortable both physically and mentally. Gu Ningxing couldn't help but close his eyes and his face softened a lot. But even so, his hand still held on to the corner of her clothes. It seems that the scent on her body is superior. Stay with me a little longer. Gu Ningxing didn't open his eyes, his thin lips gently parted, and he uttered such a sentence. She glanced thoughtfully at Gu Ningxing, and somewhere in her heart suddenly became clear. There are many incense makers in the world, but everyone has a different scent. It seems that Gu Ningxing's efforts to help have no other purpose, only to suppress toxicity. Speaking of which, he is also a pitiful person. If that were the case, the two of them wouldn't be unable to cooperate. Thinking so, Yi Qingqing lowered her eyebrows and eyes, pondering her words in her heart. Just as she was about to speak, the anxious voice of the guards came from outside the door. Sir, your Majesty urgently calls. Upon hearing this, Gu Ningxing suddenly opened his eyes with a hint of authority in his voice. Got it. As he spoke, he stood up and walked out. At the door, he turned his head and glanced at Yi Qingqing with his spare light before leaving directly. At this moment, Yi Qingqing remembered that she had not yet talked about cooperation. However, the days ahead will be long, and there will always be opportunities. Yi Qingqing skillfully cleaned up the residue in the incense burner, and then covered the traces on his body with powder. After a while, Gu Ningxing didn't come back and instead sent someone to inform Yi Qingqing. It is said that His Majesty temporarily dispatched him to go out for disaster relief, and he will depart the day after tomorrow. He has been busy with government affairs these days and will not come to the Eastern Palace. Also ask her to take care of her health. Yes, if she dies, Gu Ningzheng may also be unable to escape the fate of being brutally killed by the emperor. After the guards left, Yi Qingqing pondered for a long time. Reviving her life, she naturally dared not seek any more family affection. The bone-wrenching pain is still fresh in her memory, she can't repeat the same mistake. Now Gu Ningzheng needs her to drive away drugs, and she must firmly grasp Gu Ningzheng as a backer in order to win a glimmer of hope. After thinking it through, Yi Qingqing came up with a plan. She took some incense-making materials and sewed them into the sachet. Although this sachet may not be as effective as an antidote, it can also alleviate symptoms and alleviate his pain. I hope he can understand her thoughts and leave something to save her life before leaving. Otherwise, according to Yi Qingqing's vengeful nature, she might not be able to hold on until he comes back. Thinking so, she pinched the sachet in her hand and called out softly. "Qinghe." Someone responded and respectfully blessed her body. The concubine's wife. Looking at the slightly green lotus in front of her, she seemed to have returned to her past life. That year, she was forced to marry the crown prince as a concubine and only took Qinghe as a dowry maid. After being falsely accused and having her hand severed, Qinghe served her closely every day. The maidservant and mother-in-law in the Wang mansion were instructed by Yi Qingqing to make things difficult for her. It was Qinghe who repeatedly pulled her back from the gates of hell. Finally, it was also Qinghe who, in order to protect her, was dragged out and beaten to death. And she could only watch it all happen helplessly, unable to stop it. Pada. A tear slipped from the corner of her eye. "Sisters concubines, what's wrong with you?" Qinghe's slightly panicked voice reached her ears, pulling her thoughts back. Fortunately, Qinghe is still alive and everything is still in time. In this lifetime, she will definitely do her best to protect Qinghe. Yi Qingqing took out a handkerchief, wiped away the tears from the corners of her eyes, and pursed her lips with a smile. "No problem, the wind is strong today and sand has entered. But this is in the room, where is the wind?" Qinghe felt strange in his heart, but he didn't say much. Then, Yi Qingqing handed the sewn sachet to Qinghe and instructed him. "You give this item to Jiu Qiansui, Lord Gu. Remember, be careful not to be seen." Qinghe took the sachet and nodded heavily at her. "Don't worry, concubine." After speaking, she turned around and left. Yi Qingqing stood by the window, watching Qinghe's back gradually disappear from sight, and the stone in his heart finally fell to the ground. Perhaps, for the sake of the sachet, Gu Ningzheng would also bless her for a while. On the other side, Qinghe, who came out of the side garden, stood in the courtyard, staring at the sachet for a moment. Not only did he not leave the East Palace, but he hurried towards the main garden. At this moment, Yi Qingqing was sitting beside Xiao Qingze with a stiff neck, looking aggrieved. She wore a goose-yellow dress today, which looked even more lovable. Xiao Qingze reached out and gently comforted her shoulder. "Qiner, you have also seen Gu Ningzheng's aggressive posture. If this palace does not do so, he will expose this matter to his father, who will surely think you are arrogant and domineering. If this palace wants to marry you in the future, it will be even more difficult. Believe in this palace, these are all temporary measures taken by this palace. How can I be willing to punish you before I have time to love you?" Chapter 11. According to. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Yi Qingqing stood by the window with a faint expression, watching Qinghe gradually lose his vitality. During this time, Qinghe repeatedly cast a distressed glance at her. But she remained unmoved. Looking at the bruised Qinghe on her body, Yi Qingqing walked out and personally covered her with a white cloth, intimidating her in all directions. "Rebels, this is the end. Did you hear me clearly?" Everyone stiffened and answered loudly. "Listen carefully." Pop 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 pop. There was movement coming from behind, and Yi Qingqing turned cautiously to look back. "I saw a person leaning against the wall, staring at her with a seductive gaze. Take a closer look, isn't it Gu Ningzheng who was sent by the emperor to relieve the disaster? How did he come? Before she could answer any questions, Gu Ningzheng in front of her spoke up first. The side concubine's move was really decisive. As he spoke, he lazily stood up and walked towards Yi Qingqing. When the two were only one step away, he raised his eyebrows lightly, curved his lips, and smiled self-deprecatingly. Heartless and ruthless, excluding dissidents, it seems that the concubine and I are of the same kind. He took another step forward and vaguely leaned his head over, whispering in her ear. Such means are also worthy of being my woman. The hot breath sprayed on the earlobe, making it itch a bit. The servants present all lowered their heads, afraid of seeing what they shouldn't have seen. Let's all go down. Yi Qingqing stood in place, calmly dispersing the crowd. Seeing everyone leave, she effortlessly took a step back and distanced herself from Gu Ningzheng. Unlike last time's attitude, she appeared neither humble nor arrogant this time. She's not afraid of him being unhappy and killing her. Gu Ningzheng stared at her with great interest, thinking to himself. Mr. Gu, why don't we make a deal? Yi Qingqing's face was plain, and his back was straight. Okay, I promise. Gu Ningzheng couldn't help but turn serious when he saw her serious expression. Seeing him readily respond, Yi Qingqing was somewhat surprised. I thought I needed to waste some time talking, but I didn't expect Gu Ningzheng to be such a talkative person. It made her think so much for nothing. She reached out slightly and made a gesture of invitation to Gu Ningzheng. Gu Ningzheng didn't show any affectation and walked directly into the room, where he sat down. Just as my gaze touched the teacup on the table, I was momentarily stunned. After a moment, he took out a white jade cup from somewhere and poured a cup of tea, savoring it carefully. I can help Mr. Gu alleviate toxicity and even develop an antidote. Yi Qingqing pursed her lips and said so. As soon as the words fell, Gu Ningzheng's emotionless voice came through. Just one more thing, keep my identity confidential. If you dare to spread this matter, I will definitely make it impossible for you to survive or die. Upon hearing this, she pursed her lips and nodded in response. This is nature. Although she said so, even if he didn't mention this, she probably wouldn't have the courage to speak up about it. Gu Ningzheng put down the white jade cup in his hand and lightly tapped the table with his fingers, making a curious inquiry. What about you? What do you want me to do? Help you get rid of Miss Yi Er, or help you ascend to the position of crown princess? Upon hearing his words, Yi Qingqing let out a bitter smile and shook her head repeatedly. No way. I don't have a good impression of the crown prince. Lord Gu just needs to help me escape from the palace and let me go free. Freedom. This palace is a place where many women want to squeeze their heads in, and she just wants to escape with all her heart. Gu Ningzheng's eyes were burning as he looked at Yi Qingqing, with even greater interest in his heart. At this moment, the sound of hurried footsteps came from outside the door. The next moment, I saw Xiao Qingze storming into the room in anger. Yi Qingqing, don't go too far. Yi Qingqing stood up and stared at him with a smile on his face. Oh. Why did the crown prince say this? Xiao Qingze squinted his eyes and gritted his teeth. You are ruthless and ruthless, killing people's lives recklessly. With such brutal methods, how can you be considered a concubine? As soon as these words were spoken, Yi Qingqing was almost laughing in anger. Your Highness the Crown Prince, when did you have such a leisurely and carefree attitude to care about just a servant girl? At the end of the day, I still want to take this opportunity to give her a cruel and unrestrained reputation. Then I took the opportunity to arrest her and welcome Yi Qin into the palace. She has plans to leave the palace, but she wants to leave in a dignified manner, rather than leaving in embarrassment under the guise of being laid off. Being stared at by Xiao Qingze with cannibalistic eyes, Yi Qingqing not only remained calm, but also raised her lips and chuckled lightly, mocking her. Your Highness the Crown Prince's words are not accurate. Isn't it all because of the crown prince and his sister that Qinghe came to such an end? Today's incident has caused trouble in the palace, so there must be an explanation. My concubine asked Qinghe to bear this blame for the sake of saving His Highness the Crown Prince's face. As the conversation turned, Yi Qingqing looked up and down at Xiao Qingze. If His Highness the Crown Prince is dissatisfied, I will not be unable to accompany him into the palace again. I will explain clearly about my sister and the groom's secret plot against me. These words made Xiao Qingze's face turn red and green. Unfortunately, Gu Ningzheng still smiled and agreed. I can help the concubine with the evidence. Okay. 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 Choke him on this matter. Xiao Qingze's gaze shuttled back and forth between the two, clenching his fists in anger. But this matter concerns Yi Qingqing's reputation. A person who is not afraid of death, if it really drives her crazy, she might really be able to do such a thing. He still wanted to welcome Yi Qingqing into the palace, but the spontaneous combustion dared not provoke her. Staring fiercely at Yi Qingqing, Xiao Qingze dared not say anything more and could only leave with a full belly of anger, shaking his sleeves. Gazing at the back of Xiao Qingze's departure, Yi Qingqing unconsciously raised the corner of her mouth. For some reason, seeing Xiao Qingze feeling exhausted made her feel incredibly happy. Gu Ningzhen gave her a faint glance and asked in confusion. Are you not afraid of him jumping over the wall in a hurry? Afraid? Everyone has died once, what's the fear of death? Yi Qingqing secretly complained in her heart. But this matter can only rot in her stomach. She looked up at Gu Ningzhen with a smile on her face. I'm afraid, of course I'm afraid. So, I'll trouble Lord Gu to take care of me more in the future. Don't forget, we're grasshoppers tied to the same rope now. After speaking, Yi Qingqing blinked at Gu Ningzhen. Gu Ningzhen, who had never seen her on such a side before, suddenly froze in place with an unclear expression. This woman is really unpredictable. Don't say it, it really looks like him. Before Gu Ningzhen could react, Yi Qingqing turned around and took out a sachet, casually throwing it into Gu Ningzhen's arms. The sachet I made for you contains the spices I specially prepared to alleviate your toxicity. I won't leave you with Lord Gu today, please feel free to do so. Gu Ningzhen grabbed the sachet and lightly sniffed it under his nose. A faint fragrance rushed into his nose, and he felt comfortable all over. But this smell doesn't seem as good as the one on her body. Just as he was thinking this, he heard Yi Qingqing mercilessly issue an order to expel guests. No, just throw it away after using it. This woman is really. Gu Ningzhen laughed back in anger and was about to say something. Suddenly, footsteps and sharp voices came from outside the door again. Empress Dowager has an order to pass on to Yi Qingqing and Gu Ningzhen for an audience. Chapter 12. Target. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I know that you are a general person, but your words are frightening. As the Crown Prince's concubine, many people are watching in the dark. Can you understand what I mean? The Queen lightly patted Yi Qingqing's hand and sighed helplessly. Having said so much, how could Yi Qingqing not understand? She pretended to be obedient and nodded at the Queen, saying softly, I understand. Seeing her respond, the Empress felt relieved and her eyes changed before continuing. The Crown Prince has not yet married the Crown Princess, so you need to work harder on the affairs of the Eastern Palace. You two are husband and wife, and in the future, you still need to be more considerate of each other. Don't be laughed at by others. When the Queen said these words, her gaze seemed to unintentionally glance at the location where Gu Ningzhen had just been. Husband and wife integrated. Only Yi Qingqing is on Xiao Qingze's mind. How could he ever have taken her to heart? Now that she had heard the Empress's words, Yi Qingqing felt extremely sarcastic. But the Empress's meaning is clear to her. She is secretly accusing her of being the Crown Prince's concubine. She should always pay attention to propriety and not tarnish the Eastern Palace. Yi Qingqing suppressed his anger to the bottom of his heart, slightly blessed himself, and raised his lips in agreement. The Empress said so. Watching her become more obedient, the Empress nodded with satisfaction and did not mention this matter again. Instead, she talked about another matter. Your Majesty's health is recovering quite a bit now, which is also your credit. Our palace has already discussed with the Emperor and wants to hold 100 Flowers banquet. You will be fully responsible for hosting this 100 Flowers banquet. What do you think? 100 Flowers banquet. The 100 Flowers banquet has always been a gathering place for influential people. The Empress's actions clearly show her respect, but in reality, it is not just to attract connections for the Crown Prince. Yi Qingqing felt like a mirror in his heart, but it didn't show on his face. A hint of surprise flashed in her eyes, and she suddenly looked up at the Queen, excitedly confirming with her again. Is Empress Dowager's words true? Is the 100 Flowers banquet so important that I really want to entrust it to my concubine? The Queen smiled in her eyes and nodded slightly. Thank you very much, Empress Dowager. I will definitely live up to Empress Dowager's expectations. As she spoke, she quickly bowed and thanked the Queen. The Queen was clearly very satisfied with her reaction. She lifted the person up with a smile and gently comforted them. You just need to act boldly, and the Crown Prince's palace will also give more attention. In the future, he will not dare to treat you harshly. Thank you very much, Empress. Yi Qingqing shyly lowered her head and pursed her lips in response. After a brief chat without any pain or itching, the Queen issued an order to expel guests. This also caters to Yi Qingqing's wishes. Trapped in this vast palace, she felt extremely suffocated. When will she be able to escape from this prison-like palace? Yi Qingqing glanced at the deep blue sky and let out a deep sigh. Suddenly, one hand grabbed her arm and pulled her behind the rockery. She instinctively wanted to scream, but was covered by a pair of extremely bony hands on her lips. The aura that belonged exclusively to the man in front of her rushed into her nose, making her unable to help but recall the scene of that day. Her eyes flickered and she swallowed, her body trembling slightly. Lord Gu, this is in the palace. The man forced her to a corner, reached out a hand, gently hooked a strand of hair next to her cheek, and leaned towards her ear with a cold tone. What's wrong? The concubine is afraid. Yi Qingqing pursed her lips, suppressing a sudden surge of fear in her heart. She stretched out her arms to separate the two and looked up with a serious expression. Lord Gu doesn't need to provoke me. Now that we are people on the same boat, with Lord Gu present, what fear do I have? Upon hearing her say this, Gu Ningzheng raised his sword eyebrows slightly and stared at Yi Qingqing with interest, extending his tongue to lick his lower lip. The fragrance on her body lingered at the tip of her nose, causing him to feel a slight palpitations in his heart. What kind of fragrance did this woman use? Gu Ningzheng's eyes darkened for a moment, then he restrained his desire and stood up straight, brushing off the creases on his body. Empress Dowager, did you mention a minister? Her lips straightened, her eyebrows furrowed slightly, and her face responded calmly. No, but the Empress mentioned the 100 Flowers banquet and asked me to host it. Upon hearing this, Gu Ningzheng's narrow and long eyes showed some surprise, but he quickly figured out the key point. He reached out and placed his hand on Yi Qingqing's shoulder, gently caressing her. Her face was unpredictable, like a venomous snake that could bite at any moment. As Yi Qingqing was feeling uneasy, Gu Ningzheng suddenly curled his lips and suggested. That's good. The concubine should be well prepared and not let down the Empress's kindness. Upon hearing him say this, Yi Qingqing instinctively frowned, feeling a hint of displeasure in her heart. She hated Xiao Qingze to the bone, but Gu Ningzheng asked her to personally make a wedding dress for him. Before she could speak, the man in front of her followed her neck and lifted her chin, his eyes burning with flames. If the concubine can take this opportunity to increase her own chips and leave the palace, wouldn't it be just a matter of time? Of course, he will also benefit. Glancing at Gu Ningzheng, Yi Qingqing couldn't help but blush. Apart from his identity, his face is truly flawless. Thinking of her unfulfilled wish, she forcefully withdrew her thoughts and nodded in gratitude. Thank you very much for your advice, Mr. Gu. Then, her gaze shifted downwards and fell on his slender and white hands, smiling rather than smiling. However, Mr. Gu's move may have exceeded our scope of cooperation. Gu Ningzhen calmly moved his hand between her neck, and with just a little force, he could twist her neck. Since we want to thank you, we naturally need to show some sincerity. As he spoke, he quickly grabbed his hand behind Yi Qingqing's neck and pecked at her pink lips. This is the reward for serving as a minister. Before Yi Qingqing could react, Gu Ningzhen walked away with a faint smile. Gu Ningzhen. You're shameless. Yi Qingqing randomly took out a handkerchief and wiped it hard on his lips, glaring angrily at the back of Gu Ningzhen as he left. Your Highness, don't make a fuss, itch. I really want to die in my palace, let me embrace you. Shortly after entering the Eastern Palace, Yi Qingqing heard an untimely frolic. Following the sound, I saw a pair of figures leaning against each other.